Ambassador Margaret Hayes stood before the massive assembly of alien representatives, her hands resting calmly on the polished podium. The chamber stretched high above her, filled with floating platforms where creatures from 400 different worlds watched in silence. Some had scales that shimmered under the soft lights. Others had bodies that seemed to float in contained atmosphere bubbles. A few looked almost human, while others defied description entirely. Margaret had prepared for this moment for weeks. She had rehearsed her words, considered every possible reaction, and steeled herself for what must be done. Behind her stood two other human diplomats, Robert Chen, a veteran negotiator with silver hair and tired eyes, and young Lieutenant Emma Foster, who clutched a data tablet against her chest like a shield. For 50 years, Margaret began, her voice echoing through the vast chamber, humanity has been honored to serve alongside you in this council. We have shared our technology, our knowledge, and our friendship. We have fought together against common threats and built a civilization that spans the stars. High Counselor Draxus shifted on his platform. The massive insectoid being had compound eyes that reflected the light in unsettling patterns. His mandibles clicked together in what Margaret had learned was amusement. This sounds like a farewell speech, Ambassador Hayes. Surely you are not about to do something foolish. Margaret met his gaze without flinching. 3 months ago, we brought evidence to this council. Evidence of corporate exploitation on 40 developing worlds. Innocent populations trapped in debt cycles designed to last generations. Children born into servitude because their grandparents needed medical supplies. Entire civilizations working themselves to death to repay loans with impossible interest rates. The chamber erupted in murmurs. Some species communicated through color changes in their skin. Others released scented chemicals that translation devices converted to words. The noise built to a crescendo before Draxus raised one clawed limb for silence. We investigated those claims, Draxus said smoothly. The business practices were found to be legal under council commerce regulations. Legal, Margaret repeated, letting the word hang in the air. Yes. You investigated and found that enslaving entire worlds through predatory lending was perfectly legal. Then we asked you to change those laws. We presented detailed proposals for reform. We showed you the faces of the victims. We pleaded for basic compassion. Councillor Thomas Reed spoke up from his water-filled chamber. The Delphin's voice came through synthesized speakers, carrying genuine concern. Ambassador Hayes, we did discuss your proposals extensively. The vote was 847 to 1, Margaret said. Only humanity voted to protect those innocent beings. Every other species in this chamber voted to allow the exploitation to continue. Business is business, Draxus stated flatly. We cannot regulate every transaction in the galaxy. The free market must be allowed to function. The free market, Margaret said quietly. Is that what you call it when corporations from the core worlds deliberately target primitive societies? When they offer medical technology to dying populations at prices they know can never be repaid? When they write contracts in languages those people cannot even read? She reached into her jacket and pulled out a small data chip. The gesture was so human, so simple, that it seemed out of place in this chamber of advanced beings. This chip contains the official notice. Effective immediately, the United Terran Alliance is withdrawing from the Galactic Council. The chamber exploded in noise. Creatures shouted in hundreds of languages. Translation devices struggled to keep up with the chaos. Draxus slammed his platform controls, and a sharp tone cut through the disorder. You cannot simply leave the council, he said, his synthesized voice sharp with anger. There are protocols, procedures, obligations. We are fulfilling our obligations, Margaret replied calmly. All trade agreements are hereby terminated with 6 months' notice, as specified in council law. All joint research projects will transfer to council control within 90 days. All human military personnel serving in peacekeeping operations are being recalled immediately. We are breaking no laws, Councillor Draxus. We are simply exercising our right to leave. Emma Foster stepped forward and placed a larger data storage device on the podium. This contains all relevant documentation, transfer protocols, and logistical details. We are not abandoning our responsibilities. We are ending our participation in a system we can no longer support. Robert Chen cleared his throat. For 50 years, we believed this council stood for something greater than profit. We believed it represented the best of what civilization could achieve. We were wrong. This is emotional blackmail. Draxus protested. You think you can force us to change by threatening to leave? We are 400 species. You are one. You need us far more than we need you. Margaret allowed herself a small, sad smile. That is where you are mistaken, counselor. We are not trying to force you to do anything. Your choice has been made clear. You value corporate profits over sentient lives. That is your decision to make. We simply choose not to be part of it anymore. Thomas Reed's voice carried desperation now. Margaret, please. Let us find a compromise. Surely we can discuss this further. There must be some solution that satisfies everyone. We tried to discuss it, Margaret said. For 3 months we presented evidence, made arguments, appealed to conscience. You voted. The discussion is over. She turned away from the podium, her 2 colleagues following. Behind them, the chamber erupted in chaos once more. Aliens shouted, threatened, pleaded. None of it mattered now. Margaret walked steadily toward the large doors at the back of the chamber, her footsteps echoing on the polished floor. Ambassador Hayes. Draxus called out. You will regret this decision. Earth will suffer without council protection. Margaret paused at the doorway and looked back one final time. Perhaps. But at least we will suffer with our dignity intact. Goodbye, counselors. I truly hope you find what you are looking for. The doors closed behind them with a deep, resonant boom that sounded like the ending of an age. Outside, the human delegation walked through corridors lined with artwork from 1,000 worlds. They passed alien dignitaries who stared at them with confusion and concern. Word was already spreading. Humanity was leaving. Emma Foster broke the silence. What happens now, Ambassador? Margaret kept walking, her expression determined. Now we go home. And we build something better. 2 weeks had passed since the human delegation walked out of the Galactic Council chambers. Councillor Thomas Reed sat alone in his private office, surrounded by floating screens filled with data. Each screen told a story of disaster. Economic reports painted a picture he could barely believe. His aquatic features, normally calm and composed, twitched with growing alarm. The markets had crashed first. Within 48 hours of humanity's departure, stock values across 300 systems had plummeted. Investors panicked when they realized how deeply human innovation had woven itself into galactic commerce. Trading systems humans had designed now operated without their oversight. Nobody else knew how to fix the glitches that were appearing. Thomas scrolled through medical reports next. Hospital administrators from 200 worlds were sending urgent messages. They were running out of critical supplies. Human pharmaceutical companies had stopped all shipments. Worse, many of the medicines themselves were based on human research. Other species had been manufacturing them under license, but the complex production techniques were failing without human technical support. A chime indicated an incoming call. Thomas accepted it, and the face of Administrator Helen Park appeared on his screen. The human woman looked tired but resolved. Counselor Reed, she said formally. Helen, please, Thomas said. We have worked together for 15 years. Surely we can speak as friends. Can we? Helen asked. Friends listen to each other, Thomas. Friends care when the other warns them about innocent people suffering. Thomas felt something like shame, though his species expressed it differently than humans did. I voted with you. I argued for the reforms. You argued softly, Helen replied. You let Draxus and the corporate bloc steamroll the discussion. You voted right, but you did not fight. What do you want from me, Helen? Nothing. I am simply informing you that all human personnel will be evacuated from Council space within 30 days. This includes medical staff, engineers, researchers, and teachers. We are leaving detailed documentation for everything, but... She paused. Thomas, we tried to tell you. The systems are more interconnected than you realized. The call ended. Thomas stared at the blank screen for a long moment before turning back to his reports. The military situation was somehow even worse. Admiral William Thorne had just transmitted his assessment, and it made Thomas want to retreat into his water chamber and never emerge. Human peacekeepers had been maintaining stability in 15 active conflict zones. With their sudden withdrawal, old hatreds were erupting into violence. The Void Raiders, a loose confederation of pirates and outlaws, had become bold almost overnight. They had always feared human retaliation. Human Marines had a reputation throughout the galaxy as efficient, ruthless when necessary, and impossible to intimidate. Without that deterrent, the raiders were attacking merchant convoys that had not seen trouble in decades. More concerning were the reports from the border regions. The KRYNN Federation, always aggressive but cautious, were suddenly mobilizing entire fleets. Their strategists had recognized the same thing Thomas was beginning to understand. The council had just lost its backbone. High Counselor Draxus called an emergency session. The chamber felt different now. Where once there had been confidence and arrogance, now there was nervous energy. Representatives whispered among themselves, their various forms shifting with agitation. Order! Draxus commanded. We must address these temporary disruptions. Temporary? Thomas stood up, his voice carrying across the chamber. 4 to 7 supply chains have completely collapsed. Medical facilities are rationing basic supplies. 3 wars have begun in formerly stable regions. This is not temporary. The humans are bluffing, Draxus insisted. They will come back. They need us. Thomas pulled up statistics on the main display. Numbers and charts appeared, hovering where everyone could see them. 60% of our logistics protocols were developed by human efficiency experts. Our medical technology advancement over the last 50 years was 70% human-driven research. Even our translation software, the very system allowing us to communicate right now, was primarily human-designed. We have their documentation, another counselor argued. We can manage. Can we? Thomas enlarged one particular chart. This shows maintenance requirements for the Nexus Station life support systems. Human engineers designed them. They left us the manuals. 3 of our best engineers have been trying to interpret the instructions for a week. Yesterday, Section 7 lost atmosphere for 40 minutes. If humans had not designed redundant safety systems, 300 people would have died. The chamber fell silent. Thomas continued, his voice harsh now. We took them for granted. We thought because they were willing to help, they would always help. We forgot that willingness is a choice. Draxus shifted uncomfortably on his platform. Send another delegation. Offer them concessions. Better trade terms. Technology exchanges. I already tried, Thomas said. They refused to meet with us. Their defensive perimeter is now established around all their colonial systems. They are not hostile. They simply will not talk to us. Then what do you suggest? Another counselor demanded. Thomas looked around the chamber at faces from hundreds of worlds. Some looked afraid. Some looked angry. Some looked confused. I suggest we consider why they left. Not how to make them come back, but why they felt they had to leave in the first place. They left over business regulations. Draxus said. Over corporate policies that have been in place for centuries. They left, Thomas said quietly, because we valued profit over people. And now we are learning the cost of that choice. The session devolved into arguments. Different factions blamed each other. Corporate representatives insisted the free market would correct itself. Military commanders demanded action against human isolationism. Nobody had solutions. Thomas returned to his office and found more reports waiting. Food shortages were developing on agricultural worlds that had relied on human farming technology. Educational systems were struggling because human teachers had filled specialized roles nobody else wanted. Research projects were stalling without human scientists. Captain Richard Blake transmitted from the Earth Defense Perimeter. Counselor Reed, another council ship is requesting permission to enter human space. What is their purpose? Thomas asked. They claim it is a medical emergency. They need human expertise for a plague outbreak on Corvin 6. Thomas felt his heart sink. What did the humans say? They offered to transmit all relevant medical data and research. But they will not send personnel into council space. They said, and I quote, we hope you can save them. We truly do. But we will not return. Thomas closed his eyes. The plague on Corvin 6 was deadly. Human doctors could save thousands. But they would not come, and he could not blame them. Why should they risk their lives for a civilization that had dismissed their concerns so casually? On his screen, another alert appeared. The KRYNN Federation had just destroyed a council patrol fleet. It was the first major defeat the council had suffered in 20 years. Three months had crawled by since humanity withdrew from the Galactic Council. Dr. Helen Carter stood in her laboratory on Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, watching news broadcasts from across the galaxy. The screens showed images that made her chest tighten with pain. Refugee camps overflowing with displaced aliens. Hospitals with patients lying in hallways. Children crying for food that was not coming. Turn it off, her colleague James Foster said from across the lab. He was younger than Helen, barely 30, but his face looked older now. You are torturing yourself. They are suffering, Helen said quietly. Innocents who had nothing to do with the council's decision. They always do, James replied. His voice was flat, empty of emotion. The powerful make choices. The weak pay the price. That is how it has always been. Helen wanted to argue, but she could not find the words. She had voted to leave the council. She had supported the withdrawal. She still believed it was right. But watching the consequences unfold felt like swallowing broken glass. On one screen, a Talarian mother held her sick child, begging for medicine that no longer existed. Human pharmaceutical companies had stopped all shipments. The local manufacturers had tried to continue production, but without human technical support, they were failing. Contamination was creeping into the supply chain. What medicine they did produce was often useless or dangerous. Another screen showed footage from the Keller sector, where two species had resumed a war that human peacekeepers had stopped 15 years ago. The death toll was climbing daily. Buildings that had stood for centuries were now smoking ruins. Families fled through streets filled with debris and bodies. James came to stand beside Helen. Together they watched in silence. Do you remember what Draxus said? James asked. That business is business. That the free market must function. I remember. I wonder if he still believes that now. Far across the galaxy, Councillor Thomas Reed was asking himself similar questions. He sat in an emergency strategy meeting with Admiral William Thorne and a dozen other military commanders. The holographic display in the center of the room showed the KRYNN advance. Red markers indicated conquered systems. Yellow markers showed systems under attack. The amount of yellow made Thomas feel sick. They are moving faster than we anticipated, Admiral Thorne said. His reptilian features were tight with stress. Without human tactical support, our response time has tripled. By the time our fleets arrive, the KRYNN have already taken the system. What about the defense stations? Another admiral asked. The stations were designed by human military engineers, Thorne replied. We have the blueprints, but understanding them is different from building them. 3 stations we completed last month failed their first combat test. We are not sure why. Contact the humans, someone suggested. Hire them as consultants. We tried, Thomas said. They declined politely. They will not participate in council military operations in any capacity. The room fell silent. On the display, another yellow marker turned red. Another system had fallen to the KRYNN. Councillor Thomas decided to try something desperate. He authorized a second diplomatic mission to Earth. This time they brought real concessions. New trade agreements with favorable terms. Technology sharing protocols. Most importantly, they brought a proposal to reform the predatory lending laws that had started this whole crisis. The delegation's ship approached the human defense perimeter. Unlike before, this time they were allowed to transmit a message directly to Earth. Thomas had specifically requested Ambassador George Mitchell, knowing the man had always been sympathetic to the council. George's face appeared on the screen. He looked tired but not angry. Behind him, through a window, Thomas could see Earth's surface. Blue oceans and white clouds. It looked peaceful. Councillor Reed, George said. I am surprised you came personally. The situation is desperate, Thomas admitted. George, we are prepared to make significant changes. The lending laws will be reformed. The corporate oversight will be strengthened. We have a complete proposal here. George listened as Thomas outlined everything. The concessions were substantial. They addressed almost every concern humanity had raised. When Thomas finished, silence stretched between them. That is good, George finally said. Those reforms will help many people. Then you will return? Thomas asked, hope rising in his chest. No. The word hit Thomas like a physical blow. But we are giving you what you asked for. You are giving us what we asked for 3 months ago, George corrected gently. After 3 wars have started. After thousands have died. After medical supplies ran out and children starved. You are reforming the system now because it is hurting you, not because it was wrong. Does the motivation matter if the result is good? George was quiet for a moment. Thomas, I know you voted with us. I know you tried. But we told you what would happen. We warned the council that these systems were interconnected. We explained that removing human participation would cause problems. And you were all so certain that we needed you more than you needed us. We were wrong, Thomas said. I am admitting it. We were arrogant and foolish. Please, George. People are dying. Yes, they are, George replied, and his voice carried genuine sadness. And that breaks our hearts. We are not monsters, Thomas. We take no pleasure in this suffering. Then help us. We told you what mattered to us, George said firmly. Dignity. Freedom. Justice. You chose profit. We respect your choice. Now please respect ours. We are not coming back. The transmission ended. Thomas stared at the blank screen for a long time. Around him, the delegation members looked defeated. They had come with everything they thought the humans wanted. It had not been enough. On Earth, George turned away from the communication console. His assistant, a young woman named Lisa Grant, watched him with concern. That was hard to watch, she said. It was harder to do, George admitted. But we cannot go back. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Even though people are suffering. George walked to the window and looked out at Earth. We offered them the research. We gave them the medical data. We transmitted tactical information to help them fight the KRYNN. We are doing what we can without returning to a system that dismissed our values so completely. High Counselor Draxus called another emergency session. This time his confidence was gone. The corporate representatives who had supported him were quiet now. Their profits had evaporated along with their markets. The military commanders were openly discussing retreat strategies. The humanitarian crisis was overwhelming their resources. Thomas stood before the council once more. I am formally proposing a vote of no confidence in High Counselor Draxus, he said. And I am proposing complete reformation of our government structure. Not minor changes. Complete transformation based on the principles humanity tried to teach us. You would destroy everything we built. Draxus protested. We are watching it destroy itself, Thomas replied. The only question is whether we learn from this or die from it. The vote was called. For the first time in council history, a high counselor was removed from power. Rachel Quinn had served in council intelligence for 12 years. She had tracked smugglers, monitored hostile species, and prevented 3 potential wars through careful information gathering. She thought she knew how to find hidden threats. But sitting in her office now, staring at the data on her screens, she realized she had missed something enormous. How long have they been planning this? High Counselor Thomas Reed asked. He stood behind her, looking over her shoulder at the evidence Rachel had compiled. At least 10 years, Rachel said. Probably longer. We just were not looking. The main screen showed a map of human expansion. When humanity had joined the Council 50 years ago, they controlled Earth and 3 small colony worlds. Now, the map showed something very different. 4 to 7 star systems glowed blue, marking Terran Commonwealth territory. Massive shipyards orbited uninhabited worlds. Research stations dotted asteroid fields. Defense platforms surrounded every major population center. They built all of this while being council members? Thomas asked. Yes. And we never noticed because we assumed they needed us. Rachel pulled up construction records. Look at this. 15 years ago, humans requested permission to establish a mining colony in the Outer Reach. We approved it because nobody else wanted that region. Too far from trade routes. Too expensive to develop. And that mining colony is now a shipyard producing vessels that match our best military designs. Maybe exceed them. Rachel brought up images of sleek human warships. They were not just leaving, Counselor. They were preparing to be independent. Thomas felt cold despite the comfortable temperature. What else? Rachel pulled up more data. 7 years ago, Human Agricultural Corps requested access to several uninhabited worlds for farming experiments. Again, we approved because these were worlds nobody wanted. Poor soil. Difficult climates. The humans said they wanted to practice terraforming techniques. Let me guess. They succeeded. Beyond anyone's expectations. Those worlds now feed 40 million people. The Terran Commonwealth is completely self-sufficient for food. They do not need our agricultural trade at all. Thomas sat down heavily. We thought we were doing them favors. Giving them access to worthless territory. They were not asking for favors, Rachel said quietly. They were asking for freedom. And we gave it to them because we did not think it mattered. But the revelation that truly shocked the council came 3 days later. Rachel had been investigating human communications, trying to understand their plans. She found something she had not expected. First contact logs. Diplomatic archives. Treaty documents. They found new species, Rachel announced to the emergency council session. 2 intelligent civilizations we did not know existed. the Vithin and the Corellians. The chamber erupted in noise. Unknown species were rare. Finding two was extraordinary. Finding two and keeping it secret was unthinkable. Where are they? Draxus demanded. He had lost his position as High Counselor but still attended sessions as a regular counselor. The Vithin occupy 7 systems in what we called the Dead Zone. We thought that region was empty because our sensors detected nothing. The Vithin evolved underground. They generate almost no electromagnetic radiation. We simply never saw them. And the Corellians? Gas giant dwellers. They live in the upper atmospheres of planets we classified as uninhabitable. Again, we never looked closely enough. Thomas leaned forward. What are the humans doing with them? Rachel displayed the treaty documents. Equal partnership agreements. Mutual defense pacts. Technology sharing protocols. The Vithin have joined the Terran Commonwealth as full members. The Corellians are still considering, but early indications suggest they will also join. On what terms? Another counselor asked. The terms we should have offered 50 years ago, Thomas said, reading the documents. No exploitation. No corporate colonization. No forced technology transfer. True partnership between equals. Rachel continued her presentation. But that is not all. The humans have been providing aid to species the council corporations were exploiting. The Jalan people, who were drowning in debt from medical loans. The Korvax, who were working off mining rights agreements. The Trell, who sold their education system to corporate interests. That is interference with legal business contracts. Draxus protested. The humans operated outside council jurisdiction, Rachel countered. They established medical clinics on neutral worlds. Offered job training programs. Created education systems that did not require indentured servitude. They did not break any contracts. They just offered alternatives. Thomas understood now. They were building a new system. Not trying to fix ours. Building something completely different. Yes. And it is working. Rachel pulled up economic data. 12 species have formally requested to join the Terran Commonwealth. Another 20 are in preliminary discussions. Species are choosing the human system over ours. The implications spread through the council like poison. They had not just lost humanity. They were losing the moral authority that held their civilization together. Species were looking at 2 options, the council with its corporate dominance and legal exploitation, or the Commonwealth with its principles of dignity and partnership. Professor Elizabeth Morgan appeared on the main screen via a permitted transmission from Earth. She was an elderly woman with white hair and sharp eyes that had seen decades of galactic politics. You asked why we left, Elizabeth said without preamble. You thought it was anger or revenge. It was not. We left because we could not be part of a system that values profit over people. We could not look at ourselves in the mirror while supporting policies we knew were wrong. So you built your own system, Thomas said. We built what we wished yours had been. Not perfect. We make mistakes. But at least we try to do right by people. And these new species you contacted? You kept them secret from us. Elizabeth's expression hardened. We made first contact. We explained galactic politics honestly. We told them about the council's strengths and weaknesses. We let them choose whether to reveal themselves or remain hidden. They chose to remain hidden until they could join the Commonwealth instead. That should tell you something about the council's reputation. Another counselor spoke up. You are stealing our potential members. We are offering alternatives to people who deserve choices, Elizabeth corrected. If your system was appealing, they would choose it. They are not. The transmission ended. The council chamber fell into troubled silence. Economic projections appeared on displays throughout the room. Within 5 years, the council economy would contract by 40%. Within 10 years, they might lose another 50 species to the growing Commonwealth. Admiral William Thorne delivered the military assessment. The KRYNN defeated our fleet in the neutral zone yesterday. Complete victory. They destroyed 15 ships and captured 7 more. Human tactical doctrine would have prevented this, but we still do not fully understand it. Can we learn? Someone asked. Not fast enough. The humans spent decades developing their military philosophy. We are trying to copy it in months. It does not work that way. 6 months had passed since humanity severed all diplomatic ties with the Galactic Council. High Counselor Thomas Reed stood in what had once been the most powerful government chamber in the galaxy. Now it felt empty despite being filled with representatives from hundreds of worlds. The confidence was gone. The certainty had vanished. In its place was fear and desperate hope. Thomas had spent those 6 months pushing through reforms that would have been unthinkable a year ago. The predatory lending laws were completely abolished. Corporate power was restricted by new regulations that protected developing worlds. A new charter had been drafted based on principles of equality and mutual respect. The very principles humanity had begged them to adopt. The vote is complete, Thomas announced. The Council reformation passes with 92% approval. We are no longer the Galactic Council. We are now the Galactic Community. Applause echoed through the chamber, but it sounded hollow. Everyone knew why they had changed. Not because it was right, though Thomas believed it was. They changed because they were dying. Species were leaving. Economies were collapsing. The KRYNN were winning the war. They had run out of options. Now we must ask the humans to return, Draxus said from his seat. He was just a regular counselor now, stripped of his former power, but his voice still carried weight. We must ask, Thomas agreed. But we cannot demand. We cannot expect. We can only hope. The diplomatic vessel that approached Earth 3 days later carried a delegation of 20 representatives. Thomas led them personally. They had requested a meeting on neutral ground, expecting negotiations in some space station or orbital platform. Instead, they received coordinates that brought them directly to Earth itself. Landing on humanity's homeworld felt strange to the alien representatives. Some had been to Earth before, decades ago during the early days of cooperation. But now it felt different. More guarded. More separate. Human defense satellites tracked their every movement. Fighter craft escorted them through the atmosphere. They were guests, but not entirely welcome ones. Ambassador Margaret Hayes met them at the landing facility. She looked older than Thomas remembered. Her hair had more gray. Her face carried lines that spoke of difficult decisions and sleepless nights. But her eyes were still sharp and her handshake was still firm. Counselor Reed, she said formally. Welcome to Earth. Please, Margaret. We have known each other too long for such formality. Have we? Margaret asked quietly. I wonder sometimes if we ever truly knew each other at all. They walked through corridors decorated with art from Earth's history. Paintings and sculptures that showed humanity's struggles and triumphs. Wars and peace treaties. Suffering and hope. Thomas noticed that none of the alien artwork that had once decorated human government buildings was present anymore. The meeting room overlooked the Atlantic Ocean. Waves crashed against rocks far below. Seabirds circled in the sky. It was beautiful and peaceful, and it made Thomas ache with something he could not quite name. Admiral Daniel Park joined them, along with several other human officials. The formalities were observed. Documents were presented. Thomas laid out everything the council had done. Every reform. Every change. Every attempt to become what humanity had asked them to be. We were wrong, Thomas said simply. I am not here to make excuses. We valued the wrong things. We protected the wrong interests. And innocent people paid the price for our mistakes. We have changed the laws. Reformed the system. We are asking you to come back and help us build something better. Margaret looked at the documents carefully. She discussed them quietly with Admiral Park and the other humans. Finally, she looked up at Thomas. These reforms are good, she said. They will help many people. We are genuinely pleased to see them. Hope bloomed in Thomas's chest. Then you will return? No. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Thomas felt the other delegates shift uncomfortably around him. Draxus made a small sound of frustration. But you have everything you asked for. Draxus protested. The laws are changed. The corporations are regulated. What more do you want? This is not about what we want, Margaret said firmly. This is about trust. You made these changes because your system was failing. Not because you believed they were right. Not because you cared about the people who were suffering. You changed because you had no other choice. Does it matter why we changed if the result is good? Thomas asked desperately. Admiral Daniel Park spoke for the first time. Yes. It matters. Because the moment things stabilize, the moment you feel secure again, what is to stop you from going back to the old ways? We cannot rebuild trust on a foundation of desperation. The room fell silent except for the distant sound of ocean waves. Thomas felt hope dying inside him. They had come so far. Changed so much. And it still was not enough. Margaret stood and walked to the window. She looked out at the ocean for a long moment before turning back to face them. However, she said, and Thomas felt hope flicker again, we are not without compassion. We will provide immediate humanitarian aid to populations suffering from the conflicts and shortages. Medical supplies. Food. Engineering support for critical infrastructure. But no military support. Draxus asked bitterly. No tactical assistance against the KRYNN? We will help repel the KRYNN, Admiral Park said. Because letting them conquer innocent worlds would be wrong. But we will do it as allies, not as subordinates. Not as council members. As independent partners. Margaret returned to the table and placed a new document in front of Thomas. We propose a new framework. Not a council, even though you have renamed it community. Not a hierarchy. A true partnership of equals. Thomas read the document carefully. It outlined a cooperative structure where no species held authority over another. Where decisions required consensus rather than majority vote. Where economic relationships were based on mutual benefit rather than exploitation. Where military cooperation was voluntary rather than obligated. This will take years to implement, Thomas said. Yes, Margaret agreed. And it will require you to earn humanity's trust again. That will take even longer. But if you are serious about change, if you are committed to building something better, then we are willing to work with you. And if we refuse? Margaret's expression was sad but resolute. Then we continue on our separate paths. The Commonwealth will keep growing. We will keep offering alternatives to species who want them. And the council, or community, or whatever you call yourselves, will have to find your own way forward. Thomas looked at his fellow delegates. He saw the same understanding in their eyes. They had no real choice. Accept humanity's terms or watch their civilization slowly dissolve. But perhaps, he thought, perhaps that was not such a terrible thing. Perhaps humanity was offering them something more valuable than a return to the old ways. Perhaps they were offering a chance at redemption. I accept, Thomas said quietly. On behalf of the galactic community, I accept your proposal. Margaret nodded. Then let us begin. Over the following weeks, human aid ships began arriving at disaster zones throughout the galaxy.